Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. Together we dive into the world of sci-fi and science fiction. From episodes of Star Trek, Star Wars, to The Walking Dead, Resident Evil, all the hot new science fiction movies from the back doors of Marvel or DC. The Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. You'll never look at science fiction the same way again.
GSMC Sci-Fi Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Alex. Today, I want to talk to you guys about starship captains. I know I've really been on a Star Trek kick lately, especially with Picard, but for good reason. I think that the Star Trek franchise is one of the greatest franchises in the entirety of sci-fi history. Now, I know that is not a revolutionary opinion to hold. It is very popular amongst a ton of geeks out there, and I am one of them. Star Trek has been a huge part of my childhood and also a huge part of my growth as a human being in general. It has shaped a lot of my philosophy and my career trajectory and my worldview. I imagine that many of you are like me in that aspect. We all have our favorite starship captains, and in the Star Trek universe, mine tend to be Picard and Janeway. It's really difficult for me to pick one favorite between those two, and I also like to make the argument that Jack O'Neill should kind of be in the mix for that. I know. He's from Stargate SG-1. He's not even in the Star Trek universe. But I think that as a leader of a group that is traveling the stars, even though they are traveling it by a different method, Jack O'Neill has a lot in common with the different starship captains, while he still has his own approach. I have learned just as much from Jack O'Neill as I have learned from Picard and Janeway and Sisko. And even though he is from a totally different franchise, I think that the lessons we can learn from Jack are very different from the lessons we can learn from other starship leaders like Han Solo or from Malcolm Reynolds. And we can say that that is partly due to the limitations of those universes because they are movies rather than long TV shows, even if we do have one season of like 13 episodes of Firefly. It's still a little different, but I digress. I'm still going to make that argument as we go along, and today I want to talk about starship captains, especially in Star Trek in general. So first up, I'm going to talk about Philippa Georgiou. So I know a lot of folks have mixed feelings about Star Trek Discovery, but I love it, and I love Philippa. So for Philippa Georgiou, she is played by Michelle Yeoh, and I absolutely love her. I love Michelle Yeoh in pretty much everything she's ever been in. She is absolutely amazing, and she ranks right up there with Angela Bassett in regards to fantastic actresses, in my personal opinion. I will watch pretty much anything either of those two ladies are in. So when I was watching Star Trek Discovery, I was super stoked to see her in the show, and I love both versions of Philippa in Star Trek Discovery. I love her as the good Philippa Georgiou, who we don't get to know very well. And I also really love the Mirror Universe version of her. She is pansexual, she is absolutely wild, and she is chaotic neutral. Philippa is going to do what is good for Philippa. She is like the Ents because she is on no one's side because no one is on her side. She does not really care about how things go for everyone else. She is just here to fulfill her duties as being the emperor of the mirror universe, more or less. She is absolutely imperious, she is unforgiving, and she is the emperor of the Terran Empire. So they didn't give her a mustache to indicate that this is the mirror universe Philippa, but that's part of the fun of having her there. So she is an imperial majesty, mother of the fatherland, overlord of Vulcan, Dominos of Kronos, Regina Andor, Philippa Georgiou, Augustus Eoponius, Centaurius. I love that she has somewhat of a Roman name there at the end there as well. And she has fought for and won every step of the way in her journey to becoming emperor. She is very hardcore, but she's also kind of flippant in a lot of ways too. Philippa just gives no F's, you guys. She knows that she is awesome and that no one else can touch her, and I absolutely love that about her. Philippa is unapologetically Philippa. She will make decisions sometimes out of a sense of fondness for Sonequa Martin Green's character Michael Burnham, but at the end of the day, it's not because of Michael, it's because of how Philippa feels towards Michael. So I really enjoy her as a character. I love it when she is hitting on all of the other characters as well. She's like, whatever, you're not down for it, it's whatever. But I am, and she cracks me up. She is very great at deception. She is really good at working over everyone else and playing the game. But she really seems to enjoy being a bad guy too, and there is something fun about that in her character. She delights in being evil, and I really like that about her. She has clawed her way to the top, and she has earned every right to be as crazy as she is at this point. I like it. You guys know that I'm a big fan of villains and anti-heroes, hence my episode on the Joker, but I really, really enjoy her. She was able to have the opportunity to save the day after she got thrown into a battle between the Federation and the Klingons, but what she does is a matter of calculation. She's doing what she needs to do because she's playing chess while everyone else plays checkers. She doesn't do anything to truly be altruistic. She does what she needs to do to preserve herself and to get herself a spot in Section 31. So now, not only is she evil and super wild, but she is also able to waltz around violating the Temporal Prime Directive in the name of Section 31. So she is exceptionally brilliant. I think a lot of INTJs get cast as villains, and Philippa Georgiou is no different. I would certainly class her as an INTJ, very similar to how Sheev Palpatine also is often considered an INTJ, if you're familiar with the Myers-Briggs personality tests. And Philippa fits that perfectly. She is calculating, she is patient, and she will do whatever she has to get what she wants by any means necessary. I'm a big fan of Mirror Universe Philippa, and I'm a big fan of the direction that Star Trek Discovery is headed in. It is very much like an alternate timeline kind of situation, and they are doing some weird timey-wimey stuff with it, as well as really delving deep into the types of spore drive methods of traveling that they originally wanted to use. Roddenberry originally wanted to use that in the 60s, and they would not let him because of the war on drugs. So, I'm stoked to get to see that come to life now. I think it's a lot of fun. folks are going to have their own opinions about it, but for me, it's very similar to the types of stories that we see with the movie universe with Chris Pine instead of what else is going on here. So the Kelvin timeline is very different from the Prime timeline that we see in Picard and TNG and everything. And the Picard series really ties the Kelvin timelines together with the Prime timelines. So I really recommend checking that out. But if you just want something wacky and fun too, but it's also kind of dark, I really enjoy Star Trek Discovery for that. In that manner, it reminds me a bit of Stargate Atlantis, where things go sideways really quick because they are out there on their own, but also there is some levity in certain situations. And I see that with coronavirus going on right now. It's very much that concept of if you don't laugh, you're gonna cry in some ways. And so a lot of people deal with the heaviness of the ever-present day and everything that's going on in our lives that can be super upsetting by laughing or by being flippant about it. And Philippa is a very great character for that type of concept. Although not much really rankles Philippa. It's not really an act for her. She's just like, okay, whatever. Because she's not really super attached to life in a lot of ways either. And that makes her very different from some of our other starship captains. Philippa does not have the sense of duty to the people under her like even Picard or Janeway have. Picard and Janeway are going to lay down their lives for their crew, but they are doing that out of a sense of duty to the crew. Whereas Philippa's like, it's whatever. Like, if I die, I die. I don't wanna, but I mean, it's whatever. And I love that sense of flippancy that she has. You probably won't last super long working under Philippa Georgiou. Maybe a little bit longer than working for Darth Vader and the Emperor. But she is absolutely pitiless and she is a fascist. So in that regard, I'm really excited to see a woman take the reins as being a chaotic neutral villain and a captain, essentially, a leader. Although she is not a captain at this point, she is, in the Mirror Universe, an emperor. I love seeing that in Philippa Georgiou. So she's one of my favorites. Because again, this list isn't the best per se. We're not going for best leaders. We're just saying some things that we can learn and respect about different starship captains. We're going to go on a quick break, and when we come back, we are going to talk about Captain Archer.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now. Don't bother. What's hot on Netflix and everything in between. That's GSMCpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Before the break, we were talking about Captain Philippa Georgiou, specifically the Mirror Universe version of her, where she is an emperor of the Terran Empire. Now we're going to talk a little bit about Jonathan Archer. So Archer is not really most people's favorite, but I like him. Star Trek Enterprise really grew on me. I didn't like it the first time I watched it when I was younger, but I watched it again as an adult during my 3-year journey of watching every episode of Star Trek in order, and I really came to like the show. For the first 3.5 seasons, they did not really have their feet under them. A lot of it was Monster of the Week style things, as they seemed to follow more of a pattern of the X-Files or Supernatural, rather than following its predecessors like Star Trek TNG, and really harnessing the magic of TNG. It was trying to get its own legs under it and become its own thing, with a captain who was much more chill and more comfortable with hanging out with the crew than Sisko or Picard or even Kirk or Janeway were beforehand. Even Janeway maintained a sense of distance from everyone. I'm still upset about Janeway and Chakotay, but that is neither here nor there for Archer. Archer is really the softest of all of them. He is very chill and he's more trusting than the others, but he's also one of the earliest starship captains, so we kind of have to give him a break. He's kind of a Boy Scout, and in that way, he's mostly just exploring the stars. He wants to just chill. He wants to be pals. He's very much a transformational leader. He is leading from within and wants to get to know his people as people. They aren't just crew members to him. And again, I wouldn't say that that would be true for Picard or anyone else, but by Picard's own admission in this season of Star Trek Picard, he has had trouble in expressing his emotions and in feeling a lot of emotions, and he likens himself to Data in that way. So Picard feels very much like an android in some ways because he is more reticent with his emotions, whereas Archer is almost his antithesis in that way. Even when T'Pol and Malcolm and Trip are kind of fighting him on having these like almost family type dinners in the captain's quarters, he's like, no, come hang out. It's just going to be me and you and my dog, and it's going to be dope. And he's just very much an extrovert, whereas a lot of the others are more introverts, and they practice more stoicism. Archer is just out there to be a bro. He's like, let's go and check things out together. This is going to be great. And I kind of love that enthusiasm when it's juxtaposed with all of the other starship captains. In that way, he's kind of fun, but in a good alignment way, in a similarity to Philippa, where Philippa is like kind of flippant, but she is chaotic neutral, and Archer is instead a really good dude. Like, he wants everything good for everyone around him and will give a lot of folks the benefit of the doubt where other starship captains won't. Now, that does bite Archer in the butt quite a bit, but it is really fun for us to watch as it goes along. It opens us up to a lot of crazy things happening, like Trip growing nipples on his arm and everything else. But Archer, he's a guy who loves his downtime. He's super chill and is, generally pretty checked out. So I like him in a crisis, and he can sometimes be a really great diplomat. But it takes a lot to really ruffle his feathers. In particular, I love his interactions with Jeffrey Combs' Shran. So Jeffrey plays so many different characters. He played Wei Yun in Deep Space Nine, whom I absolutely adored. That is my favorite character he's played of all time. All the Wei Yuns, in fact. But he is just a fantastic actor. And I really enjoyed him playing the Andorian Shran as well, and seeing his interactions with Scott Bakula's character. Because if we had subbed in any of the other starship captains, they would not have been able to be friends with Shran the way that Archer is. So Archer is willing to give him the benefit of the doubt, whereas some of the others might have just as well shot Shran as spent any time with him. They definitely would not have trusted him as far as they could spit him. But Archer's empathy and compassion allows him to make even tenuous friends like Shran much better than some of the others would have been able to. And in that way, I think it's a really great manner to respect, because even though we might view that as a weakness, and it often is Archer's weakness, it can also be one of his greatest strengths. So I really enjoy that about Captain Archer, and I think that if we would have gotten further along in the series, then we would have gotten some really awesome storylines down the line. Unfortunately, we just had one too many of those Beauty and the Beast style episodes where Hoshi is being held prisoner by essentially what is Beast from Beauty and the Beast. in trying to entice her to stay there and just interpret his entire library and everything. That was a little bit too on the nose, and everyone was like, okay, this is a little much. But once you get 3.5 seasons into Star Trek Enterprise, that's really where they get their legs under them, and they're able to go, okay, we have an established set of bad guys for this series. We have the Xindi. This is where we're going with all of this. And season 4 was really good. Unfortunately, it took it just a little bit too long to get its legs under it and was canceled by that point. And that really bums me out because season 3.5 on is really golden for Star Trek Enterprise. It was just a little bit sillier in many ways than I think a lot of folks were ready for, in the very similar manner of like Stargate universe was too dark for folks who were used to the more lighthearted methods of Stargate SG-1 and Stargate Atlantis. So this was kind of the inverse issue, but for the Star Trek franchise. Now, I like Archer in general. He would probably get on my nerves if I worked for him. I'm more like T'Pol in that instance where I'm like, don't make me hang out with you. Like, that's not what I want to do. If I want to talk to you, if I need you for anything as my boss, I will hit you up. But you are a little too extroverted for me. Please stop talking to me. You're too animated. I would prefer to work for Picard or Janeway, who can be chill if you want to talk to them about something that they're interested in, particularly as it relates to science or to literature or archaeology, things like that. That's kind of their Venn diagram mandorla. Whereas with Archer, it's just like, bro, I don't want to be your bro. I don't want to come and have dinner with you. If we happen to be in the dining hall at the same time, sure, we'll hang. But I don't want to have dinner with you. That sounds terrible. But you know, that's the difference in working with introverts versus extroverts in general, where spending time with them is something that you have to do versus something that you get to do. So Archer very much strikes me as a guy who would just give you constant performance reviews and be like, yeah, you're getting on my nerves. Whereas Janeway and Picard are like, yeah, you get your annual performance review, and if anything happens in the meantime, I will just flag you down and let you know. We'll go talk in my quarters about it, or, you know, in the captain's ready room. So for Archer, I wouldn't necessarily want to work for the guy, but as a starship captain, I do respect him at this point. It's taken me a long time to come around to Archer, but he, you know, he hangs out with his dog a lot. I love my pet a lot too, but he does hang out with his dog at one point in the series, in the second season episode of Night in Sick Bay, when he should be working on diplomatic relationships with people. It's adorable, but it's also dereliction of duty. And it is a pretty good insight into who Archer is as a person. Picard would never, even though I love Picard. I love them both. But yeah, it's just crazy, some of the things that Archer gets into. But again, he's supposed to be one of the first starship captains, and he's mostly out there for exploration. So I get where he's coming from, and he's just trying to keep his people's mental and emotional wellness in mind. And I kind of love that he does that so wholesomely as a male captain, and that they did not just saddle Janeway or Georgiou with that. They didn't turn them into feminine stereotypes, and Archer is not a masculine stereotype. I absolutely love where they took that with him. Y'all know I love some wholesome masculinity, and as I get older, I love and appreciate Archer more and more. We're going to go on a quick break, and when we come back, we are going to talk about Captain Sisko.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about Captain Archer and how I've kind of warmed up to the guy over the years. He's super wholesome. He's a sweet dude who is just trying to care for his people mentally and emotionally as they are traveling among the stars and being some of the first explorers in their era. So I really like where he's coming from with that. And he's definitely grown on me with subsequent watches over the years. Maybe I'm getting soft in my old age, but I do really appreciate Scott Bakula's Captain Archer the older that I get. So now we are going to talk about Captain Sisko. Benjamin Sisko was the commander of the space station Deep Space Nine, and he was played by Avery Brooks. I really do like Sisko quite a bit. I know Janeway and Picard are my favorites, but hey, you've got to pick a favorite. So here we are. The increments, I guess, between each of my favorites, though, is not by that far. I love all of these people. Sisko was very firm, but also very fair. I really enjoyed that about him. He was very much bereft in a way from losing his wife, and he didn't really want to command after that point. He just kind of wanted to take care of his son. Sisko is happiest when he is thinking about playing baseball or he is thinking about cooking with his father back home. And I think that that is very beautiful in a way. I love that he's a single dad too. So most of the other starship captains, they don't have any kids. But Sisko starts out with a child, and he's like, okay, I'm going to be on a space station. I'm not really super stoked about this, but it's going to be more stable to raise my son than being on a starship, perhaps. And he ends up having to assume command in an area that is ruled by the Cardassians. So Sisko ends up in the leadership of the station, and he's embroiled in all of these politics in the region and having to deal with spiritual or religious components as well as political and military components of what's going on. I really enjoyed seeing how this worked out for him. I was honestly a bigger fan of Babylon 5, and Babylon 5 and Deep Space Nine get compared to each other a lot more than Deep Space Nine does to the other Star Trek series, but I do still very much like Sisko. So he is just kind of a reluctant leader at this point, which I really respect. He is a man who is doing his job out of duty rather than a desire to be the best necessarily, or to climb the ranks, I suppose is a better way to put that. He ends up being named the emissary of the prophets, and in this way, it is a lot to handle. So he's now a socio-political leader of the space station. He's having to deal with civilians and Federation personnel and Cardassians and Bajorans, people who tend to hate each other. And it is a lot of work for him. He's also having to regulate whatever the heck that Quark has going on that week. Quark's shenanigans of the week. And see what he's able to stop versus what he should allow out here in this kind of lawless place. So I really enjoy seeing his interactions with all of the different characters. I love his relationship with Jadzia Dax and Dax's former host, Curzon Dax. It's very interesting to me. I love the general concept of Deep Space Nine, which is also why I love Babylon 5 so much. Y'all know I love sociopolitics. So this one is really fun for me. Most of the reason why this is not my favorite Star Trek kind of stems from some of the character choices and plotline choices they made along the way. But overall, it's a really great show. And I like how weird Deep Space Nine is. So all of the other shows use the holodecks for pretty much the same purposes. On Deep Space Nine, there are really no holds barred, because you get to see civilian purposes for it as well that would not really fly in the military aspects. It's a lot of fun. But Sisko is also trying to be a dad, and so he's always kind of overworked. He has Jake running around and growing up and getting into shenanigans with Nog when Sisko is also trying to run an entire space station and deal with these local galactic politics. It's a lot for one dude to deal with because he's also involved with being the emissary of the prophets. It's a lot. People kind of view him as almost a messiah in some ways. So a lot of the Deep Space Nine stories really require him to react to a lot of situations rather than to be proactive in many ways. So he is having to deal with Quark running black market events under his nose, and that ranges from running the holosuites as some kind of porno mart to also, essentially scanning other people who are on board and using their likeness in the porno suites, and that makes it extra complicated and kind of messy. But also Quark is running all kinds of stuff through the black market. He's running goods. He's running services. He's also probably cheating at Dabo most of the time. It is a big mess overall. And you have Odo trying to keep up with Quark, and then they get super combative with each other, and Sisko is just, I feel like that man constantly has a headache. And he just looks like he constantly has a headache. But I love that about him. He's kind of like the dad of this entire starship. And he's like, I have way too many kids. Kind of like the old woman who lived in a shoe, but a dude. And everyone is actually an adult, but they still are not great at listening or following any of the rules. Sisko can really handle anything, but he has to handle an awful lot, and you can see it weigh on him. He ages kind of like a United States president in many ways. Poor Sisko. Don't get me wrong, Avery Brooks looks flawless, but I mean spiritually, the mantle that he is carrying is very similar in that way to me. Deep Space Nine also has a lot of moral gray areas, which I absolutely love. Star Trek has generally chosen most of the right answers over the years, and most of them aren't super upsetting. But in this case, in Deep Space Nine, Sisko is forced to make a lot of these decisions where there are no right choices. There are only best choices. And in that way, it reminds me of Jack O'Neill. I really enjoy the way that Sisko has to do a lot of soul searching before he comes to his decisions. But once he comes to his decisions, he does not turn around. That is something that I strongly identify with. I take a long time to make my own decisions, and I like to weigh all of the variables before I do so. But once I do make a decision, it is final and decisive, and I am not going to second guess it, and I am not going to look back. I very much love that about Avery Brooks' portrayal of Sisko And I think that he would be a great boss. I need to be able to respect my boss in order to answer to someone. That's why I do a lot of contract work. But if you are going to have someone telling you what to do, I think Sisko would be a really great boss for that. You may have to end up looking another way for some things. You might not always agree with him. Very similar to how Sam Carter does not always necessarily agree with Jack O'Neill, but she respects him and she understands that he makes his decisions for a good reason, even if she disapproves or disagrees with them. You don't have to agree with Sisko, but you do end up really respecting the man. He will do whatever he has to do for the greatest justice, for the greatest amount of people. He may have to really get his hands dirty, and I especially love his monologue where he is speaking to the computer and he's doing his captain's log regarding how he has had to lie and be an accessory to murder and everything else in order to make sure that the galaxy stays safe and not at war. And then at the end of it, he's like, computer, delete that log. And I really love everything that scene says about that man. It's absolutely beautiful as a work of fiction, and I think it would have been just as striking in literature as it was on the screen. So I am a huge fan of Sisko and the way that he is written. Even if he is not at the very top of my list for my favorite, I very much respect the man. We're going to go on another break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about Kathryn Janeway.
Watching TV has changed over time. Streaming has become the new norm. That's why Golden State Media Concepts television podcast dives headfirst to the world of cord cutting. Want to be on the loop of what's hot in Netflix? Or if it's not a preference, what about original shows in Hulu? We've got you covered. Join us as we fill in the blanks and talk about movies to stream and what show you should be binging. This is the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast.
Avery Brooks' Captain Benjamin Sisko and his firm but fair approach to commanding a space station. Now we're going to talk about one of my personal favorites, Kathryn Janeway. So, Janeway is one of my absolute favorite captains. I adore Kate Mulgrew. I loved her memoir, Born with Teeth. And if you haven't read it, you should definitely check it out. Kate Mulgrew herself does the voice for the Audible version of it, and she is absolutely fantastic. The writing of it is amazing and just lyrically conveyed and rawly emotional in many ways. And she also has an old style of speaking. It's almost like classical literature in a way, and I adore it. So half of that book as well is about her time on Star Trek. The second half of the book, that is essentially everything that it's about. And it's one of those books that I both could not put down, but was also very reluctant to finish because I did not want to part with it and finish the story, which is similarly how I felt about Star Trek Voyager. So Janeway is one of my favorites because, first and foremost, she's not just a leader, she's a scientist. She worked in science before she became a captain, and I love that about Janeway. That's partly because I identify with her very strongly. I'm not gonna lie, I have been a scientist for a very long time, and I have also been a leader for a long time. So I worked in management for a tech company for about 6 years and had 40 plus employees there. And I very much took a lot of the lessons that I learned from Captains Janeway and Archer and Sisko and Picard, maybe a little bit from Kirk, and also from Jack O'Neill in leading my team. I learned a lot about transformational leadership from them before I even knew what the term meant. I've also studied leadership for several years and have a few publications under my belt for that realm of academia as well. And a lot of it was inspired by these folks. Now, I don't say that outright in the papers. I reference Emil Durkheim, but I think that there is a ton that can be learned from Star Trek. Janeway, in a lot of ways, is partially democratic. And I think it has less to do with democracy in general and more to do with the fact that she understands and appreciates that everyone who is working for her is very good at their own jobs. So they have skills and competencies that she does not necessarily have on her own and that are complementary to her own. Janeway is stubborn in many ways, but she is able to understand when someone is presenting to her an alternative viewpoint that may be very helpful. I love that she has the understanding of humanity enough to go ahead and make Chakotay, this leader of the Maquis, her second in command. She understands the concept of essentially what is a political marriage in a way, and is able to bind these two opposing forces together by making these plans with this fellow leader. Do I wish that it could have been more of a political marriage? Maybe. I am a shipper. You guys know that about me. But I also really respect the way that Janeway approaches everything. I also love that she's able to see past people's flaws. So B'Elanna is hot-headed, and she understands the reasons why B'Elanna is hot-headed. She's part Klingon. That is just part of who she is. And just like how Captain Picard can recognize that as a strength in Worf, she's able to recognize that as a strength in B'Elanna. B'Elanna isn't just seen as hot-headed by Janeway. She's seen as passionate. And past the passion, Janeway can see that she is strongly competent and intelligent, and she is the best fit for the job. Janeway understands that there may be no perfect fit, and that sometimes you're going to butt heads with people, even people who are technically your subordinates in this hierarchy, but she will still listen to everything they have to say. And in that manner, she reminds me a lot of my previous boss, Will. Will is the best boss that I've ever had in my life, and he's had to sit down with me before and be like, hey, you're at a 10. I need you to take it to like a 7 for right now and stuff. And I was able to go ahead and just take that advice. And in that way, we were able to be friends as well as a boss and an employee. And I modeled that with my employees as well, to where my buddy Jose and I would have, friendship Alex and Jose versus work Alex and Jose. And he would sometimes be like, I don't agree with you, but I'm going to go ahead and do this because that is what you are asking of me. And I understand that you have your reasons for it, even if I don't agree. And that is very similar to how I approached my relationship with Will. I would make my case for it, but ultimately I would defer to Will's judgment. And that is what made our relationship work so well. And that is what makes Janeway's relationship work so well with a lot of the folks who are under her. They are able to be passionate and to express their emotions and not hold it against each other at the end of the day. And I really enjoyed that in my own work experience, and I'm very fortunate to have experienced that with such an exceptional leader. And I don't work for him anymore. I don't get paid to say this at this point, but but I do believe in giving credit where credit is due. A lot of my management style was based off of how Will treated me and the others around me. And he is very good at what he does, just like Janeway is very good at what she does. She's a bit more personable than Picard in many ways, and she puts up with a bit more than Picard really would. And I really enjoy seeing those aspects in a leader, where they let people be who they are, but ultimately they still draw that line in the sand. Janeway is stuck in a very difficult situation where she has a crew comprised of folks who used to be enemies and have to work together to find their way home. I really, really love this aspect. If you have listened to any of my other podcasts, such as the ones in health and wellness, you know I'm a big fan of these types of shipwrecked concepts, like Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe. It's one of my all-time favorite books. And this isn't quite Robinson Crusoe. They're not just making a home on a planet wherever they are, although there is that one delightful shipwreck episode where Chakotay and Janeway are essentially isolated on this planet because they think that they have this incurable disease at that point, and they're doing a Robinson Crusoe-style method of dealing with the consequences. But it is very similar in that manner. It's very Lost in Space, which is based off of Robinson Crusoe and Swiss Family Robinson. So I really enjoy that aspect of this. It's a lot of fun. And Janeway, if we're playing a video game and you're having to pick a captain based on difficulty level, if you pick the highest difficulty ranking, you're going to end up having to play as Captain Janeway. Because she is not only just out there exploring and everything, but she has like the highest morale issues. She has the highest issues regarding getting people to work together. And she has absolutely no guidance from anyone above her in Starfleet Command. Janeway has to make all of these decisions herself and then deal with the outcome. It is absolute peak. Heavy is the head that wears the crown. I really enjoy that about her. She feels things very deeply, just as Picard does. She is slightly less stoic than Picard, but she just carries herself with such gravitas. I really enjoy Kate Mulgrew's portrayal of her. I love how she deals with this impossible situation she is stuck in and how she is so willing to go down with the ship. In that manner, her confidence and her unwavering commitment to duty and her intelligence really remind me a lot of Samantha Carter, particularly in the episode of Stargate in which Carter is the commander of a ship and she absolutely goes down with the ship, driving it into an opposing forces ship in order to allow everyone else to evacuate but still take out the enemy. That is core Janeway. That is who she is at her core, cool-headed and able to work through opposing stances and try to find compromises. But she will make her own decision once she has heard from her crew. She will listen to what everyone has to say so that she can make an informed decision because she is a scientist and she is trying to obtain all of the perspectives and all of the variables, even if she has to make really terrible decisions like the Tuvix episode, which is one of my favorites. I really love the train car philosophy challenge, and that is a really big one that we see embodied in the Tuvix episode, where Tuvok and Neelix and it looks like an orchid, I believe, are all merged together into a single being referred to as Tuvix during a transporter malfunction. And Janeway has to decide whether this new being of Tuvix has the right to this shared body or if she needs to try to rectify the problem and separate Tuvok and Neelix and the orchid into the original parts that they were. It is absolutely fascinating, and it's one of my favorite episodes of Star Trek. It's right up there with The Measure of Man from season 2 of Star Trek, The Next Generation. It is wonderful, and I would love to work for Janeway. She would be hard on me, but I feel like I would really learn some great lessons. I have worked for someone who I think is very similar to Janeway in a lot of ways, and even when they had to, sit me down and be like, hey, I want you to approach it from a different way, I would follow them because I would always respect where they were coming from. And I knew that they had my best interest in mind as well, and were trying to help form me into a leader. Janeway is strong in developing her people, even if she never promotes Ensign Harry Kim. I mean, that's also out there. That's something that didn't happen. But for the most part, Janeway is trying to recognize the strengths in her people and help them overcome their issues. Sure, she makes mistakes and she programs a hologram to not have a wife anymore on this weird quest to feel a connection to somebody because she feels that she can't connect with any of her crew in a romantic way, even though it may take them up to 70 years to get back home, and most of them may die before that point. But I really respect her commitment to her duty, and I respect her as a person as well as an officer. We're going to go on another break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about Captain Picard.
The GSMC Life and Happiness podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back. In our last segment, we were talking about one of my personal favorites, Kathryn Janeway. And now we're going to talk about Captain Picard. Jean-Luc Picard really needs no introduction. We all know he's played by Sir Patrick Stewart. He has been absolutely fabulous in this position over the years, and his approach to acting is very similar, I think, in a lot of ways to Kate Mulgrew's. Both of them had a lot of classical acting training, and I really love their approach. They are some of the more stoic captains, and Picard is very firm but benevolent in many ways. He's super authoritative, and I love that about Picard. He will go ahead and just go, this is what's happening, and this is what you're going to do. And if people disagree, then they disagree. He will sometimes be swayed by what his people have to say, but at the end of the day, he knows what the best choice is going to be, even if it is upsetting. As a student of archaeology and of history, Picard is very familiar with philosophy. And one of the hardest life lessons I have ever learned is from Picard, in which he says, "It is possible to commit no mistakes and still lose. That is not a weakness, that is life." That has stuck with me my entire life. And I don't know if a lot of y'all believe in the Myers-Briggs testing. I know in the psychology community, a lot of people believe it doesn't work because it works more as you would have others see you and as you would see yourself rather than as you actually are. But I have taken that test so many times over the years, starting in my AG classes in 3rd grade, and I have always gotten the same result. I have always been an INTJ, and that gives me a lot of trouble in my day-to-day life because I have a penchant towards being a perfectionist and towards being somewhat pedantic in a lot of ways. So to learn that I can commit no mistakes and still lose is a very difficult lesson for me to learn. And more so to accept that that is not a weakness, that that is just an artifact of life. That's very difficult for me, but Captain Picard really taught me that, and it's something that as a particular personality type, I needed to learn. Even if you don't believe in particular in the Myers-Briggs testing and those personality types, I think that it is important to keep that in mind as someone who may be type A. It is very difficult to just accept these things sometimes, but when presented by Picard, who is very level-headed and quite rational in most ways, it really helped me to go, okay, I can actually do everything that I can, and I won't necessarily still win, and that's just something that I have to accept. It may seem very small, but that was very meaningful to me in my life as a girl growing up, and also as I've gotten older. It's been a lot easier to accept as I've gotten older, and it's one of those things that I will repost every time I see that pop up in my Facebook memories, or anytime I see it on Tumblr, etc. I will reblog it every time. It is just an innate truth for me that has taken a long time to come to. But it also has helped me in cultivating my kindness and my compassion over the years. So I recently applied for a job and I made it through the second round interview where I would have been a fundraising development consultant for a nonprofit, which is like a dream come true. And I really believed in the nonprofit's mission as well, and I still do. And I presented a great pitch, and I had a wonderful interview, and our interests really aligned, and they told me several times I was a great fit, but ultimately I didn't make the cut for it, so they decided to go in a different direction. 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 2 years ago, that would have possibly been very upsetting and maybe even crushing for me, but at this point, I very much recognize that somebody else just happened to maybe have a better interview than I did. And I still sent them the slides from my presentation for my second interview because it's for a nonprofit that benefits children who have been abused and who live with chronic illnesses. And it's for the children after all. Like the feelings that I have about not getting the position, sure, I'm bummed out, but at the end of the day, I did everything I could, and they did what they could to pick the person they felt was best for the job. And that doesn't mean that I was bad for the job or that I made any mistakes. It just means that they felt that someone else was a better fit, and that's okay. And so I can be happy for that person and also still send in my presentation for my support for the project because I had a fantastic ROI for my fundraising project. And I hope that they do use it for the children. The money part doesn't matter. It is about doing the best good that I can. And I got that from Picard. I didn't learn that in college or in any philosophy classes. I learned it watching Star Trek, and it has become an integral component of who I am as a person. And that is one of the reasons why I love doing these podcasts and why I'm spending one today just talking about my favorite starship captains. I think a lot of folks, especially those who may not be so into sci-fi, underestimate the impact that these shows can have on us as geeks. They think that they're just dorky shows that we watch sometimes, but they are truly formative and they help us to think differently. And I really enjoy that aspect. And I think that Claude Lévi-Strauss, who was an anthropologist who studied the structure of stories, would totally agree with me. He said that binary opposites like hot and cold are good to think with because they help you understand the spectrum of everything else that falls within those opposites. Like, you cannot understand warm or cool or tepid without knowing hot and cold, because cool is somewhere between hot and cold, but closer to cold. That's how you have to explain it. You are unable to really explain that to someone otherwise. And these binary opposites help us think and help inform our understandings of stories. I think that it's pretty funny in Star Trek The Next Generation how much Picard is just not a fan of children, and that's okay. I love that that is super different between him and Sisko. Sisko is a single dad and will let a lot more things slide, but Picard is just like, why is this child on my bridge? Get them away. Which is also different from how 7 of 9 and Kathryn Janeway deal with Naomi Wildman. And I'm really hoping to see Naomi Wildman in the season of Star Trek Picard. Star Trek Picard has really taken Picard on a different extended journey. He is no longer like this model Starfleet officer in a way, because Starfleet is no longer Starfleet. And he understands that that decision was made long before the Federation decided to abandon the Romulans following the synth attack on Mars. He knows that they caved to fear in that way, and that would have required them to not be Starfleet long before those events took place on Mars. I really enjoy seeing where Picard's heart is at this point. I enjoy seeing how he interacts with children in this future as well. It is absolutely beautiful where they have taken him, and I like seeing his command style as he goes along. There is one episode in particular where we get to see him reunited with Riker and Deanna, and at one point, you know, we really see them interacting as different people now. They're not calling him captain. They're referring to him as Jean-Luc at this point. They're friends, because it's way past 14 years since they have even been in a captain and subordinate relationship. And Picard does something at one point that rankles Deanna. And she's like, you know what? You had that coming. You're not supposed to say this as a counselor, but as your friend, you had that coming. That girl does not need you to act like this. She needs you to be Jean-Luc Picard. And you need to step back and recognize who you truly are and who you need to be in order for your mission to succeed. And I love that Deanna just lays into him for it. It is wonderful. And she does it from a place of honesty and truth and friendship. So she is upset with him because she knows he's capable of doing better, because she was with him through all of the other crazy stuff they encountered in The Next Generation. And they know each other so well, like very, very well, almost intimately. Not in the sexual manner, of course, but in that, you know, Picard was, you know, kind of harassed by Deanna's mom, Loxana Troi. And I really enjoy that Deanna had all of that embarrassment, but also got to know her captain better through this kind of trolling, almost hazing that Loxana put him through at that point. I really love where Star Trek Picard is going, and some of the choices that the characters are having to make are so dark in this season that it reminds me of all of the other Star Treks combined, like their darkest moments, but it also reminds me a lot of Jack O'Neill and the choices that he has had to make, and why I tend to lump him together with starship captains. We are going to go on another break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about my argument for Jack O'Neill being considered in the ranks of these starship captains. Stay tuned.
the Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, the show that gives you advice on everything travel. We explore places you've always wanted to go, as well as giving tips for traveling in those places. We'll give you advice on the best sites for travel tips, information, and discounts. Join us as we travel the world, explore cultures, and meet new people. The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Travel Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
In the Star Trek franchise, Jean-Luc Picard, and his portrayals in The Next Generation as well as in Star Trek Picard. I cannot tell you guys how excited I am to see this new show. I am stoked with how similar but how different it is in many ways, and seeing Picard in this different context, both as being far older than he was before and being outside of Starfleet, and also having this new crew outside of Starfleet. It is absolutely amazing. I find myself feeling overcome with emotion. I don't cry much. I cry like once per quarter, but I still find myself very overcome with emotion when I am watching the show, and it is one of the few shows that I have trouble putting down in a fashion that is very similar to a really good book. So, in our last segment, I also discussed how in Star Trek Picard, you find that they're having to make some really dark decisions. A lot of these characters are. Not just Picard himself, but also 7 of 9. They are making these very difficult leadership decisions and these interpersonal decisions as well that have far-reaching consequences. It is some of the darkest components of Trek at their best, but it also very much feels like some of the darker components of Jack O'Neill in Stargate SG-1. So just like I've learned a lot of lessons from Star Trek, and in particular Captain Picard, I have also learned some of my most difficult and enduring life lessons from Jack O'Neill. Jack O'Neill taught me that a lot of times in life, there are going to be no good options for you to choose from, but you will still be required to select an option. And in that case, you have to choose not a good option, but the best option. So, in that regard, I have learned a lot from both of these men. Jack O'Neill leads a Stargate team on Stargate SG-1, and although he is not the head of a ship, because Earth does not have warships at this point, they're just traveling via the Stargate. Jack is going out there and exploring the unknown. He's going where they believe no man has gone before, and he's having to lead these people into the unknown. He has 2 scientists with him, one who is military trained, Sam Carter, and she is absolutely fantastic, and much like Kathryn Janeway, Jack O'Neill is not able to form a relationship with his second-in-command, Sam, even though they very clearly are attracted to each other. He knows that it would not be safe for everyone involved, and it would not be fair, and also it's against protocol. So he has Sam there, who can blow up suns and everything. She's a physicist. He also has Daniel Jackson, who is there to perform archaeology and linguistic and cultural services, and it takes Daniel several seasons to really get his fighting skills really under control. And then they have Teal'c, someone who is originally an enemy who has sided with them in the first episode to try to create a paradigm shift in the ways of his people. So he has a lot in common, Jack that is, with the issues that Janeway and that Picard both have. Jack is very self-sacrificing, just like the others are as well. And in a different aspect, he thinks that everyone else is more valuable than he is. He believes in his people, and he knows that Sam can go ahead and pick up at any point when he needs her to. He knows that she can go ahead and lead the team, and they will listen to her. They will be able to follow the orders, and they will get done what needs to get done. He will always sacrifice himself when it comes to trying to keep his team safe as well. He will draw the attention towards himself. But whereas Janeway and Picard tend to be more serious, such as the episode where Janeway goes into that dream world and combats what is essentially fear itself, Janeway does so with malice in a way that, like, her whispers are scarier than anything that Picard or the others have ever yelled. But Jack approaches it with humor, which makes him very different from all of the others. He will act like a clown. And one of the things I love about Stargate is it also tells a story in music, in addition to what the characters are doing or the expressions on their faces or even what they're saying. And there is one episode in which Jack is having to go undercover and being cruel to everyone on his team to kind of white fang them and push them away so that they don't get hurt in the process. But he has to pretend to go over essentially to the dark side. And when they do that, they play Pagliacci in the background, which is Italian for clowns, and it is an Italian opera. Jack O'Neill very much plays the clown at this point, and I think it is a beautiful representation of what is going on in the scene that is not expositional at all. It is absolutely beautiful how they play that out in the season 3 episode Shades of Grey, and I love the approach in that regard. Jack will do whatever he has to do for the good of his people, even if it means hurting them, which is the entire concept of White Fang. He is making the best choice that he can in the circumstances that he's given, even if there are no good choices. He makes the best choices to protect those around him. I absolutely love that about Jack. I love that he will goad their enemies in many ways by trying to get them to pay more attention to him instead of everyone else. He is very self-sacrificing, and he will not ask anyone to do anything he is not willing to do himself. And in that way, he is a transformational leader as well. I absolutely love Jack O'Neill. I can't really say that enough. I love all of these captains. I love them as leaders in general. And Jack has a special place in my heart right up there with Janeway and Captain Picard. They are all fantastic leaders who really care about their people, even if each of them tend to practice stoicism in their own way. When Jack is not being a clown, he is tending to be stoic. Anytime in the series that Carter tries to tell him how she feels, he tries to stop her for her own good, even though hearing that from her is what he wants more than anything in the world. He does not want her to wreck her career over him. And it is so heartbreaking that we don't really get to see them be together, because we got more than a whisper of it, like we did with Janeway and Chakotay. Like, they outright have to admit it to each other at a certain point, or they may be actually killed, / put into a coma indefinitely to make sure that they are not a threat to anyone. And I think that it's very beautiful how they tell those stories, and I love the difficult decisions that Jack has to make. Like the time he kills essentially a Hitler character who is from another planet and is, interestingly enough, played by Renee Auberjonois, who played Odo in Deep Space Nine. And Jack closes the iris on him resulting in him splashing into the IRS and dying. So no one else knows the truth. No one else knows that Jack sentenced that man to death essentially on his own, except for Carter. She is maintaining eye contact with him the entire time as he lies to the face of their commanding officer, General Hammond, and says, "Sorry, sir, I was unable to obtain the technology that we went for. The whole planet is gone now. They were in the middle of a war and there's nothing else we can do." Because Jack chucked what was essentially plans for nuclear weapons back at the guy and locked him out to make sure that it could not be replicated on our planet, because he knew that it would be another world war and that humanity on Earth would not be able to resist the temptation to wield that technology against each other because of our differences, rather than wielding it against a common enemy like the Goa'uld. And Sam always keeps it to herself. She never breaches that confidence. And it is an absolutely beautiful display of confidentiality and trust and honor between them, even if it is a black mark on their souls in many ways. And in that way, they remind me a lot of Captain Sisko, particularly Jack. I think that he is a fantastic character, and if you have not watched the Stargate SG-1 television series, I strongly encourage you to do so. I have broken down my watch list in a previous podcast episode, and I encourage you to check that out and start with that watch list, or start in season 4 at the very beginning. They are some of the best episodes, seasons 4 through 8, in my opinion. But if you really want to get to know and love the characters, start with my watch list from season 1 and go from there, especially if you love Star Trek and any of the captains that I've discussed today. I'd be glad to work for most any of them. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Sci-Fi Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'd like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show, and writing a nice review always really helps us. Also, if you could please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, I'd appreciate it. Thank you kindly, and have a good night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.